I'm going to begin with a bit of a little of an apology as I start my sermon today, because my sermon's going to be a little bit longer than normal. As we have begun the season of Lent, I have felt a call to preach on the topic of forgiveness. And so today this week I started delving into the topic of what is forgiveness. And I came across just a ton of research, a ton of things. And so to try to condense that down was a little bit difficult. It made things a little bit longer, but I think it's really, really important for us to start delving into this topic, because Christianity actually has forgiveness as one of its cornerstones of the Christian life. And this has been proclaimed for over 2,000 years. And the interesting part that I found out this week as I started doing research is that psychologists and scientists in the last couple of decades have actually started researching forgiveness. And some of their conclusions are quite staggering. For instance, consider what Thomas G. Plant said in his article for Psychology Today titled "The 7 Rules of Forgiveness." He said this: "It's really hard to forgive, whether it is forgiving yourself or others. We could all likely use some help learning to do it better. But what we may not be aware of is that learning to forgive is good for both our mental and physical health. Quality empirical research has shown that when we are better at forgiveness, we experience lower stress, tension, levels of depression, anxiety, and perhaps most important, anger. Anger is toxic to our mental and physical health, increasing our stress reactivity and our risk for illness such as heart disease. In fact, the hostility and anger associated with type A behavior is an important risk factor for cardiovascular disease. When we have trouble being able to forgive, we hold in anger, resentment, and bitterness that can harm us in multiple ways and at multiple levels." Fascinating, isn't it? That forgiveness has a direct effect on our physical and mental health. In another article from Psychology Today titled "The Psychology of Forgiveness," Reuben Cottam, who is a PhD student, writes this: "Psychologically, when people reported higher levels of forgiveness, they also tended to report better health habits and decreased depression, anxiety, and anger levels. Even in betrayed couples, greater levels of forgiveness were associated with more satisfied relationships, a stronger parenting alliance, and children's perceptions of parenting functioning. Psychologically, higher reported levels of forgiveness were associated with lower white blood cell count and hematocrit levels. White blood cells are an integral part of fighting off diseases and infections. Together, these results highlight the importance of forgiveness, not for the other person, but for you." End quote. Again, fascinating how forgiveness affects your physical body and well-being. And these are, kind of summations of studies, but then there's personal examples. And this is a long quote from Salon magazine, but I think it's very, very pertinent to the discussion of forgiveness. In 1978, Dr. Dabney Irwin, a surgeon specializing in burns, was on duty in a New Orleans emergency room when a man was brought in on a gurney. A worker at the Kaiser aluminum plant, the patient had slipped and fallen into a vat of 950-degree molten aluminum up to his knees. Irwin did something that most would consider strange at best, or the work of a charlatan at worst. He hypnotized the burned man. Without a swinging pocket watch or any other theatrical antics, the surgeon did what is now known in the field of medical hypnosis as an induction, instructing the man to relax, breathe deeply, and close his eyes. He told him to imagine that his legs, scorched to the knees and now packed in ice, did not feel hot or painful, but cool and comfortable. Irwin had found that doing this, in addition to standard treatments, improved his patient's outcomes. And that's what happened with the Kaiser aluminum worker. While such severe burns would normally require months to heal, multiple skin grafts, and maybe even lead to amputation if excessive swelling cut off the blood supply, the man healed in just 18 days without a single skin graft. As Irwin continued using hypnosis to expedite his burn patients' recoveries, he added another unorthodox practice to his regimen. He talked to his patients about anger and forgiveness. He noticed that people coming into the ER with burns were often very angry and often not without reason. They were, as he put it, all burned up, both literally and figuratively. Hurt and in severe pain due to their own reckless mistake or someone else's, as they described the incident that left them burned, their words were tinged with angry guilt or blame. He concluded that their anger may have been interfering with their ability to heal by preventing them from relaxing and focusing on getting better. I was listening to my patients and feeling what they were feeling, Irwin told me. It became obvious that this had to be dealt with. Their attitude affected the healing of their burns, and this was particularly true of skin grafts. With someone who's real angry, we'd put 3 or 4 skin grafts on, but his body would reject them. Whenever a patient seemed angry, Irwin would help them forgive themselves or the person who hurt them, either through a simple conversation or through hypnosis. Once Irwin began helping his patients forgive, he noticed even more improvement. What you're thinking affects and feeling affects your body, he would explain to his patients, using the analogy of something embarrassing causing someone to blush. What you're feeling will affect the healing of your skin, and we want you to put all your energy into healing. I'd say you can still pursue damages through an attorney. You're entitled to be angry, but for now I'm asking you to abandon your entitlement and let it go, to direct your energy toward healing, and to turn this over to God or nature or whoever you worship. It's not up to you to get revenge on yourself or someone else. And when you know that at a feeling level that you're letting it go, raise your hand. Irwin then told the reporter, then I'd shut up, and when they raised their hand, I knew that the skin graft was going to take. It's fascinating, isn't it? And very, very powerful. The science behind forgiveness is powerful. But it doesn't mean that forgiveness is easy. In fact, every article I read acknowledged this, every single one. And I found it interesting that few of the articles delved into this aspect very deeply. Why is it so hard to forgive? Do you have a hard time forgiving? Yes or no? Most of you are shaking your head, so hopefully we're on the right track here. It's very hard to forgive, even though we know forgiveness is good for us. Even though we know it has health benefits, even though we know it has mental benefits. And not only that, as Christians, we know that forgiveness is commanded by God. In fact, every time we pray the Lord's Prayer, we say, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And usually we think this means, God, please forgive us so that we can forgive others. However, a more proper of the reading of the Greek suggests something different. I mean, it kind of plays out in that lesson that we saw from Matthew chapter 6 today. Essentially, we are saying to God, God, forgive me just like I forgive others. In other words, in the overall picture, God's forgiveness will be based in some form or fashion on how we forgive others. All this is to say is that we know we are supposed to forgive, but we struggle with it. And so today I'd like to wrestle with why that's the case. Why is it so tough to forgive? And I think where we have to start is by defining forgiveness. I mean, it's easy to say it's easy to say we need to forgive, but what is it? So bear with me to begin with. I'm going to give you a very clinical definition of forgiveness. I actually provided it for you in the bulletin. It's on that little half sheet that you have there. It gets to be a little bit wordy, but I think it's important to start with, what a good study on forgiveness gave as a definition. It was published in an article titled "Forgiveness: A Sampling of Research Results." Forgiveness is a process, or the result of a process, that involves a change in emotion and attitude regarding an offender. Most scholars view this as an intentional and voluntary process driven by a deliberate decision to forgive. This process results in decreased motivation to retaliate or maintain estrangement from an offender despite their actions, and requires letting go of negative emotions towards the offender. Theorists differ in the extent to which they believe forgiveness also implies replacing the negative emotions with positive attitudes, including compassion and benevolence. In any event, forgiveness occurs when with the victim's full recognition that he or she deserved better treatment. That's one reason why Mahatma Gandhi contended that the weak can never forgive. Forgiveness is an attribute of the strong. So, taking the wordiness apart, let's kind of break it down a little bit. Forgiveness is, 1, a change in emotion and attitude towards someone who has hurt you. 2, it's a process that a person undertakes voluntarily and deliberately. 3, it's a process that a person undertakes with the goal to forgive someone. 4, the process leads you to where you don't want to hurt the person who has hurt you. 5, the process leads you to get rid of negative emotions. 6, you recognize that you deserve better treatment, but you still let go anyways. And number 7, this is extremely difficult for a, quote, weak person to do. All right, this is a scientific clinical definition. It's a good viewpoint. I think it helps us understand forgiveness a little better. But let me ask you this. Does that definition help you understand why it's so hard? Yes or no? Some saying yes. All right, we're going to keep going because for me, it didn't help me understand why it was so difficult. And when I looked into the biblical definition of forgiveness, that helped me understand better. The Greek word used for forgiveness in the Bible, in the New Testament, is aphesis, which often has the legal sense of release from office, marriage, obligation, as also from debt or punishment. So I'd like us to particularly focus on that last piece of the definition, a release from debt or punishment. And this is why I think it's particularly hard for us to forgive. Now, please note that I'm not trying to deny anything that the scientists have said. I believe that what they have is accurate. What I'm trying to do is add another piece to the puzzle to help us understand. Because when you forgive someone, you release them from debt to you. What does that mean? Well, first, let's think about it in terms of a financial transaction. Let's say that one day you need to buy a car. You don't have enough money to buy that car, so you go to the bank and you take out a loan. You're in debt now, right? Well, you go purchase the car, and then you have a series of setbacks in your life. You are unable to pay your car payment. You go to the bank, you explain your situation, and it just so happens that the CEO of the bank overhears your plight and he has compassion on you. He comes up to you and says, "I am terribly sorry to hear about all the things that have happened to you. I tell you what, we're going to write off your loan." What did you just receive? You've received forgiveness, right? Exactly. You've been forgiven your debt. But here's the question: who paid for it? Who said that? The bank. The bank paid for it. The bank paid for your car, right? Your debt is forgiven. The bank paid the cost. Now, let's switch gears a little bit and let's talk about an emotional transaction. Let's say that a coworker of yours spreads malicious rumors about you. Soon everyone is looking at you suspiciously. Where once you had numerous friends around the office, suddenly you find yourself eating lunch alone. Finally, someone asks you if the rumors are true, and you are taken aback at what was said about you. You discover the source of the rumors and are even further taken aback at the person who started them. You are hurt, you are wounded, your reputation has taken a nasty shot, and yet you decide to forgive. You decide that instead of seeking revenge and restitution, you will simply go about your life and do your job. Now, you know that something is owed to you, but rather than demand what is owed to you, rather than demand justice, rather than demand revenge, you decided to move on with your life. You were owed an emotional debt. This time it wasn't financial, it was emotional, But then who decided to pay it? You did. You absorbed the cost. You paid the price for somebody else's wrong. Now, do you see why forgiveness is so difficult? Yes or no? Oh. Even though we know it's good for us, even though we know it's commanded by God, even though we know it has benefits for our health and well-being, even though we know it's a cornerstone of the Christian life, to pay for someone else's wrong somewhat simply goes against the grain of our being. It is extremely hard to practice. It is extremely hard to accomplish. Who wants to pay for somebody else's wrong? So therefore, let us put together a working definition of forgiveness that will guide us in the next several weeks. I have this on that piece of paper too. You can read it. Forgiveness is the change in our emotional state when we choose to absorb the cost of someone else's actions that have hurt us. So, given that definition, it's easy to see why the old adage is so true. To err is human, but to forgive is divine. To forgive is divine. Indeed, forgiveness is divine. And I invite you to journey with me in the next few weeks as we see this, as we see divine forgiveness, and then how it translates into human forgiveness. I invite you to join me in the next several weeks as we indeed learn just how to forgive. Amen.